We all know who Jesus is. The problem is, we all see him a little differently. To make things even more difficult, we don't recognize that we all see Jesus a little differently, so we naturally assume that our perspective on Jesus is the only perspective. In other words, the portrait of Jesus we see in our mind's eye is not the same one that others see. And because we picture Jesus differently, we come to different conclusions about what Christian faith requires of us. This week, I'm looking at some of the different portraits of Jesus that different parts of the church see. Of course, I don't mean literal visual portraits here. I'm using portrait as a metaphor to talk about our different understandings of who Jesus is and what he calls us to be and do. What I hope to do is bring to the surface some of our own unwritten, unspoken assumptions and help us to see that not everyone shares our understanding. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Tuesday, April 16th, 2024. When I counsel with engaged couples, one of the things I do is try to get them to name some of the unwritten and often unspoken assumptions about family life that each one carries. I always say something like, well, you both come from normal families. The problem is, your normals are a little bit different. I go on to use some simple examples like, what is the correct way to put a toilet paper roll on the toilet paper holder? For some, the toilet paper roll goes over the top, while for others it comes out the bottom. Neither answer is right or wrong. It's just a matter of preference, and we assume that everybody does it the same way. But when we've grown up with certain assumptions about how families work, we assume that every family should work the same way. Who shops for groceries? Who pays the bills? Who cooks? Who cleans the dishes? When children come along, does the wife quit working? For that matter, what is the ideal number of children? If one person says 2 and the other says 3, this is not a particularly major issue. But if one says 4 and the other says none, well, we have a major difference of opinion on our hands. You get the idea. Different parts of the church also make different assumptions about what it means to follow Jesus Christ. And these differences often come with different metaphorical portraits of Jesus. And once again, none of these portraits is wrong. They are simply partial and incomplete. The late theologian H. Richard Niebuhr described 5 different major types of churches, or ways of approaching the question of what it means to follow Jesus. And for the rest of the week, I'm going to follow his ordering of things. The first type he identifies is what he calls Christ against culture. This one highlights an absolute divide between the demands of Jesus and the demands placed on us by our various loyalties in the cultures we live in. Now, many people wrongly think of themselves as part of this type, but they really only are seeing their critiques of the prevailing culture, hoping to transform the prevailing culture into another kind of culture. They're not against culture per se, they're just against this culture. No, this typical answer to the question of what it means to follow Jesus Christ means a total and complete withdrawal from culture altogether in order to follow a completely different set of rules. So, what portrait of Jesus does this type of Christianity see? They tend to see Jesus as a new lawgiver who has given us definite rules to follow and expects us to abide by those rules fully and completely. For example, when they read in the Sermon on the Mount, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away, they don't see this as a metaphorical command, but an absolute literal command. And when they read, if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also, they understand it as an absolute categorical law to follow. Read the New Testament sometime with an eye to what Jesus literally calls us to do, and what you'll read is an absolutely radical message. To follow the commands of Jesus to the letter demands that we abandon the commands and norms of culture altogether. And to those on both the left and the right There are commands that they want to ignore, spiritualize, or treat metaphorically. No, this kind of Christianity pictures Jesus as the new lawgiver and as a king whose commands must be obeyed literally and fully. And in order to do it, withdrawing from culture is the only viable option. Are they wrong? Not completely. What they lift up for us is the importance of taking seriously what Christ calls us to be and do. But does it follow that Jesus requires us to abandon life in the world? Not necessarily. But these folks do tend to keep the rest of us honest about the ways we more or less successfully navigate our dual loyalty to Christ and to the culture we live in. Is this the way I envision Jesus? No, but I do recognize this as one valid and important way to see him. Tomorrow, we go to the opposite extreme and see a portrait of Christ as simply a philosopher. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.